I will just wait 1 extra minute to allow people to come in, and then we start. Okay, it's 11:02. I think it's time to start. Good morning, everyone, and very welcome to this CEPS webinar, as the COVID made the case for a new approach to minimum income protection. Let me just say that this event falls under the umbrella of an Horizon 2020 project, of which CEPS is part. It's called INGRID 2, and it focuses on inclusive growth. In the context of this project, CEPS is currently running a CEPS summer school on poverty, and in particular on reducing risk of poverty in the EU, the role of data and policies. So this webinar closes 2.5 days of work with about 30 students, 30 participants. Actually, they're students, researchers, officials working in ministries. It has been very insightful, and I think given the topic, overarching topic of the school, this final event focusing on minimum income protection is a nice way to conclude the discussions that we had. Now, besides the project, the debate about minimum income schemes has attracted a lot of attention, of course, in the context of COVID, and all the issues about how to protect most vulnerable citizens, and what kind of tools we can use in order to achieve this objective. And of course, minimum income schemes are one of the most important tools. Now we start with a situation in the European Union where many different schemes are present in member states. There is a very large variety in terms of design, in terms of implementation, in terms of eligibility, access, and then efficiency. And in March, the Commission came out with within the action plans to implement the European Pillar of Social Rights, with a possibility for a recommendation, a council recommendation in the direction of minimum income schemes to be adopted already in 2022. So the debate is really very high on this, and the European Parliament has been quite active on minimum income schemes, but also other measures to reduce the risk of poverty and of social exclusion. Now, with all this long introduction, I think that couple of big questions which we would like to discuss today. So the first one is, to what extent COVID has changed the debate around income protection, minimum income protection? What is the experience of member states which have adopted these measures, and what kind of lessons can be drawn from it? And then last but not least, what the EU can do in the context of minimum income schemes. And to answer this question, we have an excellent panel of speakers. I will introduce them one by one when I will ask him to intervene. I would like to start with Minna. Minna Ilakonno, sorry for the pronunciation. She's senior specialist at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment in Finland, and she has she has made an assessment of the Finnish experience with the universal basic income. So Minna, I would like to ask you to share with us the insights from this experience. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Would it be possible for you to share the slide I sent?
I will.
Easy for you. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Minna Ilakonno. I'm currently working in the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment in Finland. Previously, I was working in the Social Security Institution of Finland, which was responsible for planning, for implementing, and also evaluating the Finnish basic income experiment, the world famous experiment. It was implemented in years 17 and 18, so we had no idea of the coming COVID crisis. What we wanted to see, what the government wanted to see, was whether basic income could be one solution for increasing employment. It was the government's first priority, due to the fact that we have too many unemployed people in Finland. We have quite a severe structural unemployment in Finland, already had before COVID crisis. And although what I was evaluating in the experiment were the welfare effects, the main interest was in the employment effects. So what we did was that we first, of course, planned the experiment. I was not in the planning group. It was led by Professor Olli Kangas. I think some of you may know him, very famous, the basic income man of the world. There was a research group planning the experiment, and there was different kind of suggestions what kind of experiment it could be. And actually what the researchers suggested was a little bit more complicated, more challenging experiment than what then became out of kind of the government's table due to some restrictions. But anyway, we got the experiment and we had it for 2 years in 17 and 18. We selected 2,000 people to receive basic income for 2 years, between ages 25 and 58. So not very young people and not those who are already retired. And what we had to do, we had to select only unemployed people, and only unemployed people receiving so-called basic level unemployment benefits. In Finland, we have two-tier system in unemployment benefits. We have basic level benefits, and then we have earnings-related benefits. And people receiving earnings-related benefits were not included in the experiment. So we had only those receiving basic level unemployment benefits, meaning that they were mainly long-term unemployed. So from the beginning, we had a very selected group of people receiving basic income. But anyway, it was really interesting because no other welfare country in the Western world has had a nationwide obligatory experiment. It was not voluntary for these people to participate in the experiment. It was obligatory. They had to. If they were selected to the experiment, they had no way to opt out. Only if they got a child, if they kind of transferred to certain other benefits, then they were opted out. They were kind of kicked out from the experiment. But they personally, they had no possibility to opt out from the experiment. So yeah, what we did, we paid them 560 euros per month, every month, even if they didn't apply for jobs, if they were not searching for work, if they were not active enough. What's expected from normal unemployed people in Finland, when you receive unemployment benefits, you have to be really active all the time. You have to show that you search for work, you have to participate in the services, active employment services in order to receive an unemployment benefit. So we paid the same amount of money, the 560 euros for those who were in the experiment, but we didn't expect anything from them. They could do whatever they wanted. And even if they went to work, they could keep the basic income, full amount of basic income. It was not taxed away due to the fact that we couldn't include taxation system in the experiment. So there were some kind of futures in the experiment that some may say that it was basic income, it was not perhaps in a sense basic income experiment that it could have been if we could have included different population groups, different levels of basic income, and perhaps for a little bit longer time periods. 2 years is not a very long time to evaluate behavioral changes of people. But this is what we got, and we were really happy, of course, and we got really famous with it and in all over the world. And I think it was very good kind of breakthrough for other experiments and also for a larger discussion about minimum income protection. In Finland, there was not very much discussion about the experiment. Actually, it was really quiet. I gave many interviews, but mainly abroad to other to media in other countries. But and actually, after the experiment, we haven't discussed basic income actually at all in Finland. We have a quite good social security system in Finland, and we're undergoing a huge reform in our social security system at the moment. And a couple of weeks ago, a paper came out which suggested that one option for the Finnish social security in the future could be this kind of basic account. So it would replace some of the basic level benefits, for example, unemployment benefit. You receive a certain amount of money to your kind of account for every month, and you can use it or you can save it for later use. But it's really interesting suggestion. So there's a lot of discussion going on, not in Finland about basic income. I think that's more or less forgotten at the moment. But we are going to reform our social security system, and it's going to be a huge reform. So I don't know how much I can actually tell about the Finnish. I can't kind of link the Finnish basic income experiment to the COVID crisis, because there was no COVID crisis when we experimented the basic income. But of course, it can be discussed whether, and in a certain way, it was in a modest way, it was discussed. If we'd had basic income in Finland, would it have been easier for people to kind of confront the crisis, to take its kind of, it wouldn't have been the loss of jobs, wouldn't have been that a kind of huge crisis for people on an individual level. Okay, some results shortly. What we found then after we evaluated the experiment was that there were no big differences between, we had a control group and we had the experimental group, and not a very significant differences in the employment. Those who were in the experiment worked about 1.5 days more in a surveillance period than those who were in the control group. So it's not a very significant change or difference. But what we saw was a huge difference, a significant difference in well-being. So those who were in the experiment felt themselves much better in many aspects. So as regards trust, health, mental health, cognitive skills, financial stress, generally, people felt themselves much better than in the control group. So receiving, and we can say due to the research setting, the experimental research setting, we can say that while we saw these increases in well-being, we can say that it's because of receiving basic income. So that's for certain. Basic income experiment in Finland increased the well-being of those who received basic income. And that's really interesting. And I've personally been studying trust, and we all know that the more we trust each other, the better we succeed in almost all measures in societies, economically, as regards our personal well-being. So in all. The experiment was really interesting. I'm happy that I could be involved in this, and I'm actually still are doing something in a small scale, although already working in a different place. But I think this was shortly what the Finnish experiment was about, and yeah, thank you.
Many thanks, Minna, for sharing these thoughts. I find quite interesting, actually, that if I understood correctly, that the main purpose was actually employment. The main purpose.
Main interest was of the government was in the employment effects.
And in fact, the main impact was not on employment, but on well-being, if I understood correctly.
Yes, and I think the government was, they were not unhappy, but they were not very happy because there were no employment effects. Yeah.
Okay, this is very interesting. I'm sure we'll get back to it later on. I would like now to give the floor to Marcello. And Marcello Natili is professor at University of Milan. He has been working quite a lot on welfare states and also looking at the Italian experience with minimum income. So I would like to invite him to share with us his insights and his thoughts on this issue. Marcello, the floor is yours. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Thank you very much, Cinzia, and thank you very much to the Center for European Policy Studies for organizing this webinar and offering me the opportunity to contribute to such an interesting debate over one of the most important questions in Europe, namely how to reduce the risk of poverty today and which are the best solutions to improve existing anti-poverty policies and minimum income schemes in Europe. My contribution, as you mentioned, will focus on Italy. Although I worked on minimum income schemes in a comparative perspective and focused also in other cases. But you may ask why this is the case. Well, until not so long ago, actually, Italy, along the other Mediterranean countries, was cited in this kind of events for its lack of a minimum income scheme. Generally, the introductory sentence was all EU member states have a minimum income schemes except for Italy and Greece. And so it has a peculiar anti-poverty model, heavily reliant on the extended family solidarity and on the third sector, and especially faith-based organization. So a very limited role, public role, and a very limited role for the state in this policy domain. And as it is well known, this model was not particularly efficient. Actually, as recently shown by a book by Chiara Saraceno, David Benassi, and Enrica Morlicchio, even in period of economic growth, it has always been an harbinger of comparatively high level of destitution and poverty. And it also had a number of other really relevant drawbacks, including, but not limited to, comparatively low female employment rates, and a very high intergenerational transmission of disadvantages, very high child poverty rates in all South European countries. Perhaps more surprisingly, however, until 2015, we clearly observed that in a context where, and perhaps Sarah will refer to that afterwards, in a context, European context, where we observe declining adequacy of minimum income schemes in several countries and several relevant countries. Southern Europe, it is the region where I would say that we observe the greater improvement in this policy domain. Actually, after in Portugal in 2016, there was the reversal of the cuts and the austerity reforms that were introduced in the previous phase, and so we observed the restoration of the protectiveness of the main anti-poverty benefit. In 2017, a national minimum income scheme was introduced for the first time in Greece. And last year, in 2020, in the midst of the COVID crisis, also Spain overcame its traditional decentralized model and introduced a national scheme. Also in Italy, it has been introduced in 2018, quite peculiar minimum income schemes, and another one much more robust in 2019 called the Citizenship Income. the introduction of this scheme, and this is why perhaps you asked me to talk about the Italian scheme, raised a lot of attention also internationally, partially because it was the result of a highly politicized political debate. It was the big new proposal of, at the time, rising five-star movement, and was opposed by most of the other political actors. But also because the name of this instrument, actually the citizenship income, I would say not by chance, seems to imply that a universal basic income was being introduced in Italy. That was, I would say that the government of the time and the five-star movement played around this ambiguity. Well, as you all probably know, this is totally not the case. Irrespective of the name, the citizenship income is a regular, targeted minimum income scheme. So for the poor, basically, conditional on job searching activities. Comparatively speaking, it is quite generous, at least for single member households. And it is also robust in terms of overall spending. My opinion, I would say that the introduction of the citizenship income constitutes a very significant step forward for the Italian welfare state, and good news, generally speaking, especially for poor people in Italy. At the same time, it is important to emphasize that it has a significant and relevant drawbacks. It is characterized, for example, by very strict conditionality rules and a very strong, I would say, workfare activation profile. In a country as Italy, where the labor demand is persistently particularly limited, especially in Southern Europe. Too many objectives. It was considered, it was sold also an active labor market policy, and this is not the case. Even in Finland, we just discovered that it is not through active labor market policy and conditionality that you raise employment. I would not so much focus on this particular aspect in this presentation. There are other drawbacks. The equivalent scale for computing the citizenship income, as I mentioned, favors single-member household, whereas it is detrimental for large households. And we know that a large share of the Italian poverty is constituted by poor children, and so large families. Moreover, one of the most critical aspects, eligibility criteria include the 10 years of residence in Italy, at least 2 years continuously spent in Italy, thus being particularly detrimental to migrants, which also in Italy, as in most of European countries, constitute a relevant share of poor. And moreover, it has a very complex MIS testing procedure. It requires a lot of document, a lot of information on the side of beneficiaries. I have no time to go into details, but it's suffice to say that as in most cases in Europe, it combines income and assets criteria. The latter in particular, assets criteria are very stringent, and they make very complex access for vulnerable, atypical, precarious workers that constitute a relevant share of Italian people at risk of poverty. There are other drawbacks. I would say that these are the most important, in particular for today's discussion, because the crucial point is that, as it is in most European countries, even in normal times, so before the pandemic, it doesn't allow this kind of minimum income scheme to protect all people in poverty. This is a quite solid result around Europe. In Italy, only around half of the people that, according to the National Institute, National Statistical Institute, live in absolute poverty, were covered by the citizenship income, also before the pandemic. This is because some people do not demand it for some stigmatizing also reason, but also because, and the problem of non-take-up that characterize mis-tested benefits, but also because some groups were systematically excluded. Most of migrants, as I just said, irregular workers that are really relevant in Italy, precarious and underemployed workers also mostly excluded from this benefit. What happened basically, we asked what happened with the COVID crisis. Well, I don't think I need to emphasize here how a tragedy was the onset of the pandemic crisis. Leaving aside the very high mortality rate, just let me remind that with Spain and Italy, we have the highest drop of real GDP in Europe. For our discussion, what I think it is most important to emphasize that with the introduction of a strict lockdown since in March 2020, precisely the group that I just mentioned remain with no income. Irregular workers, many migrants with a limited contribution records, and many precarious and especially young workers or underemployed records, also with low contribution record, but maybe with an asset just above the poverty, the poverty threshold. The Italian government was very aware of this, and so two different solutions were taken into consideration. The first one was to enlarge the scope of this scheme, loosening the condition for accessing to the citizenship income, as it was done, for example, in Germany and in other countries. And the other option was to introduce a new means tested benefit. Also, for political reason, I would say, especially for political reason, the government decided with the second option. It introduced a new benefit scheme, the emergency income. This is a new benefit, less generous than the ordinary one, no years of residence requirements, so covering the migrants, less strict means testing, but still both income and wealth threshold, quite higher, so enlarging the audience of potential beneficiaries, but maintaining the same very complex procedure of access, maintaining, requiring an assessment of both income and wealth. Briefly, so all the administrative hurdles that were present with the citizenship income were maintained with the emergency income. Briefly, what happened? Two data allowed to assess whether this was efficient. First, the government, imagine around 900,000 people application, only 1/3 of them actually received the benefit, only 300,000. Secondly, and most relevantly, the National Absolute Poverty, the National Statistical Institute just mentioned that the number of people in absolute poverty increased by 1 million in 2020. So from 4.6 million to 5.6 million, in particular, affecting migrants and young families in Italy. These data seem to confirm that this was not the most efficient way to proceed. Let me emphasize one point. The data confirm the relevance of having a minimum income in place during the pandemic crisis. 3.7 million success to the citizenship income. Without this benefit, if the pandemic struck only 3 years ago, in Italy, it would have been a tragedy. And also the emergency income, to some extent, was relevant to overcome to avoid an even bigger increase of poverty. So briefly, better than the emergency income than nothing. At the same time, the resource could have been used to improve, to ease an access to the citizenship income. That would have been a better solution. What this tells us to people outside Italy concerning minimum income? I would give two main policy recommendations. First, avoid fragmentation, overlapping. I think I would say that the big challenge is to ease and procedure of access. Effort to target a specific constituencies of deserving pools, also to reduce overall expenditure, are not very efficient. More in general, as revealed also by a forthcoming report of the European Parliament, the two big challenges facing minimum income scheme are guaranteeing adequacy and inclusiveness. Adequacy is not so much the issue, even though for Italy at least, the pandemic crisis revealed instead that the problem of inclusiveness is crucial. In particular in Italy, the residence requirements, but in other countries, the age requirements constitute a problem. Asset criteria, Sarah just published a very good paper on this issue, so I will not focus too much on that. She will probably mention them. On means testing procedure, not only during the pandemic crisis, but more in general, in very flexible labor market, it is crucial that these schemes are able to react quickly to changing the situation, so that very complex access procedure, like requiring a lot of documents, constitute a problem. It is important to increase and to increase the means testing procedure in order to limit stigmatizing and a lot of complex access procedure. One final point, if I may, the more inclusive the minimum income scheme, the more protective, the more adequate, the more expensive they are. These raise the issue of financial sustainability, not only in Italy. In Italy, and I would say in the other Southern European countries. Obviously, there is room for improvement in the way Italy spends for social policy, but there is not so much that can be cut anymore. In Italy and Southern Europe, last decade has already been quite dramatic. Cutting pension expenditure, retrenchment reforms, cut in the health sector were tremendous, draconian, whereas there is much need to invest more in other policy sectors, social policy sector, not only on minimum income, but family policies, social services. Housing is comparatively severely underfinanced. What does this mean? Obviously, that Europe has a great role in improving and guaranteeing adequate protection in Southern Europe and in Italy. The adoption of the next generation Euro fund was clearly a game changer. To come back to your question regarding the relevance of COVID, a crucial opportunity for this country, but there is need for more, especially in this policy field, and for long-term, let's say, responses guaranteeing also in Southern Europe to adequately, I would say, react to the challenge of current times.
Many thanks, Marcello, for this very rich overview, and also for clarifying certain concepts, especially the one of citizenship income, and then the evolution with the emergency income and the response to COVID. I'm sure there will be questions later. By the way, I would like to invite the audience, so the participants, to type in questions using the Q&A function. I see a couple of people have already done it. Do not hesitate to do so more. I would like now to move to Sarah Marshall. She's a researcher and guest professor at the University of Antwerp. She's very young, but she's spent quite a lot of her time researching minimum income schemes. So Sarah, I would like to ask you to share with us what are the results of your research, maybe giving us a more European perspective.
Okay, thank you for the invitation and for the introduction. I'm going to structure my talk around the two main points that Marcello just mentioned. So around the adequacy of minimum income schemes in Europe and the access to it, so how inclusive they are. I will focus on the topic that I know best, so on means-tested minimum income protection for those of active age who are able-bodied but not in work. So this is a target group that we usually focus on, since they represent kind of the litmus test of how generous a welfare state is, how generous the social floor is for this very specific least deserving, in a sense, or considered the least deserving target group. So the aim of these schemes is usually to prevent poverty or severe poverty. They are currently present in all EU member states, and they really serve those who fall through the cracks of the general welfare state, so those who do not have access to social insurance. So it usually requires a means test, but it also makes sure that all the other rights are depleted. So it also involves tests whether these people could still be catered for by other schemes in the welfare state. So I will first focus on the adequacy of means-tested minimum income schemes in Europe for those who are able-bodied but not in work. And I base this on my own research, in which I have looked at the minimum income protection packages that are available, that exist to support specific hypothetical households. So the advantage of looking at these hypothetical households is precisely that I can look at these minimum income protection packages. So to not only look at the benefit levels guaranteed by the minimum income schemes, but to take account of other benefits that are available for vulnerable people, such as housing allowances, MIS as the child benefits, that all together constitute really the social floor, the main protection level. And it allows us to take account of how these different means tests, because each provision usually has its own means test, how they all interact in providing an perhaps adequate minimum income protection package. So this is an approach that's used by a lot of researchers, also by the OECD, and the conclusions are time and again that minimum income protection packages are not adequate in the EU member states. There are some exceptions at some point in time in some member states. So every now and then we find in Denmark and the Netherlands and Ireland that specific family types in a certain year did reach the 60% at risk of poverty threshold. But the main picture is one of inadequacy. However, within this inadequacy, there's also huge variation. So most Western European countries find themselves around 70 or 80% of the at risk of poverty thresholds. But then in the Eastern and Southern European countries, this minimum income protection package falls further back. Also, there is variation between these different family types. So we compare the minimum income protection packages that are offered to single persons and also to families with children. And then again, we find that mainly in Eastern European countries, even though they are in general less adequate, the protection level for children, for families with children, is comparatively speaking better. This is mainly because there are often care allowances for non-working parents, non-working lone parents. I want to address one caveat. So I look at, with this method, we look at minimum income protection packages. So not only the guaranteed means tested minimum income protection benefits. This means that we assume that people fully take up their rights, fully take up the benefits they're entitled to. We already know for means test minimum income protection benefits that is problematic, with non-take-up rates ranging from 50 to 80% sometimes. But if you then split these additional benefit levels and they are not automatically tied to minimum income protection received, or they are not, the application is not done for you in an automatic way or done for you by a case manager, then this means that we give an overly generous picture. If there are separate applications that need to be made, separate administrations, then the odds are that this minimum income protection package is an overestimation of what people will actually receive in a country. An important issue to address is, well, why is minimum income protection in these different EU member states so inadequate? And then the literature gives us a number of insights. So first of all, there's the idea of deservingness and less eligibility. If we really have a social floor below the welfare state, then it might make sense, or people or societies might choose to have the social floor at a level that is below the social insurance benefits that have been earned in a sense by contributions. However, there are some counterexamples within the EU member states where the insurance-based unemployment insurance and the means-tested minimum income scheme are at the same level. And it's really this means that then makes the one less generous than the other. This is, was for instance, the case with the UK's job seekers allowance. Another issue has to do with this financial incentives of making sure that people will improve when they take up work. And then we come in a bit of a conundrum, in the sense that we know that also the lowest income that you can earn from employment through the minimum wage, even when taking account of all in-work benefits, preferential tax treatments, etc., that for families with children, this minimum wage employment, if there's only one minimum wage in the household, will not suffice to protect the family against poverty. So then it makes it, well, really a puzzle what to do then. Can we then increase social assistance benefits, minimum income protection packages for those non-working up until this level of the minimum wage? It doesn't help then that minimum wages are lagging behind average wages. And it is certainly would imply a very substantial cost. So this has been calculated by Diego Collado, how much it would actually cost to increase minimum income benefits up until the at-risk of poverty threshold if you keep current financial incentives constant. And this is really sizable. Then the second point I wanted to address refer to the issue, or the second puzzle I would like to address was the issue of access to means-tested minimum income protection benefits. So like I said before, the idea of these means-tested minimum income protection benefits is to provide a social floor for those who do not have access to social insurance because of incomplete careers, because of very specific situations. So the logic is really different. The state steps in if you are not able to cater for yourself because of low incomes, because of inability to improve your situation, and because you do not have assets. So from that perspective, it makes sense to have a means test that really looks into the current incomes, and to look into the assets that you have in the sense, well, can you use them to improve your situation? However, these are income concepts that are often not known by the states. We have a lag. We know what the net disposable income was. The state knows what your current net disposable income is within 1 or 2 years. But at this moment, they simply don't know, which puts a brake on how automatic this process can be, on how non-intrusive it can be. Because currently this obsession in some countries to really get the current disposable income leads to really very intrusive means tests that can in a sense also be very Kafkaesque, like taking account of alimony when a divorce is not final yet, and it really doesn't help relations between former partners to take this into account, to also take gifts from parents who want to, well, support their children, their adult children in the sense, to also take these into account, really becomes very much in the private spheres of citizens. And you could wonder, well, what is the advantage of taking such a very staunch approach? This is also the case in asset tests. So basically all EU member states, all minimum income schemes in the EU have asset tests, but there's some variation in how stringent this is. So most member states work with really a threshold above which you're simply ineligible. So if you have more than 5,000 euros, for instance, you will not be eligible for minimum income protection, whereas other countries work with an alternative that does not encourage you to de-save at 100% in order to come below the threshold, but where they use a taper rate, assume that you will get income from your assets, and just lower the minimum income benefits accordingly. So to have more of a smoother inclusion of people. Also, what to do with family homes. There's also huge variation regarding household appliances that are taken into account, jewelry, again, all assets that are very much within the private sphere of households. But even when you would not take these more private assets into account and simply look at real estate listings and perhaps savings, even though savings are, of course, within most EU member states not known, and hence require bank receipts in order to show that you do not have savings. But if you only would look at savings and real estate, which is an exercise that we did in order to look at how many people are excluded by asset tests, we've done this exercise for Germany and for Belgium, and we really find that especially in Germany, a lot of people are actually excluded because of these relatively stringent asset tests. In Belgium, this is far less the case because we work with these taper rates, which means that, well, people will still qualify, but just get a lower benefit. That was my main overview of the main topics that I wanted to address regarding minimum income protection schemes and their main characteristics in the EU member states. Regarding the impact of COVID, if I still have time, if not, I will keep it for the discussion. So regarding the impact of COVID on means-tested minimum income protection schemes, well, I think like everything in our societies, these COVID crisis has really put a spotlight on things that were not working that well, but well, we just went with it. Clearly, there is a problem. However, I don't think it's solely a problem of means-tested minimum income protection. So the Belgium case is the case that I know best, and there we extended access to social insurance to the short-term working schemes beyond comparison. We had a long-going trend of excluding people from social insurance, of making access harder. And as a result, more and more people went into the minimum income scheme where perhaps they should not be, given our focus on minimum income schemes as a very social work type of benefits. So we made access harder. And then the first thing we did during the COVID crisis was to extend access to the short-term work scheme, where you no longer had to have met contributory requirements, precisely to cater for all these more atypical workers that were more and more left alone. And basically the only condition was that you had a contract during the time. So it didn't matter whether this was from an intermittent career, whether this was only temporary. The fact that you had a contract was enough to get a benefit and to come within the realm of the short-term working scheme. However, even with this huge extension of the coverage of social insurance, it was not enough. There were still new profiles that did not fit the bill, mainly freelance workers who did not have a contract at the time that the lockdown started. And these were people that accessed minimum income protection and that really were a new target group of MIS minimum income protection scheme of the local welfare agencies. And this meant, first of all, that case managers had a lot of additional work in trying to assess access of these new profiles and have all the intrusive means tests and the very detailed nitty-gritty work in singling out, well, are they entitled to minimum income protection? And secondly, also that these people themselves fell back on a very inadequate benefits. And also that they had to identify themselves first as someone who might be eligible for social assistance. So I think it's a safe bet to say that a lot of people will not have realized that this scheme was also there for them. So what is the impact of COVID on minimum income schemes? So within Belgium, it has led towards, I think it should lead towards an exercise on what do we want minimum income protection to cope with? What do we want within the realm of unemployment insurance? Perhaps we need a more extensive workers insurance, a more accessible workers insurance. And also to think through, is this very local financing of minimum income protection and a very local administration? Is this really what we expect, what we need when the scheme is catering more and more to new profiles and new risks that it was not intended to at first? So I think the rest can be dealt with later.
Thanks very much, Sarah, for this overview on adequacy and access, but also for the last point you made. I think that they're really very important and they require, further thinking about social protection and to what extent minimum income schemes relate to other forms of income protection, especially those related to employment. I would like now to move to Francine Mestrum. She is the chairwoman of Global Social Justice. This is an association dealing with social protection, and she has put forward the idea of the common, the social commons, so an idea of related to the common goods. Francine has also experience as an academic. She has worked, at least for what I saw, quite some years on social protection issues. She published not long ago a piece on social Europe, which attracted my attention for this specific event on universal basic income. Francine has quite strong view on this point. So I would like to invite her to share her thoughts with us on universal basic income, more in general on minimum income schemes, and also the way you see the future, if you want, of social protection. The floor is yours.
Thank you so very much. And thank you to the other speakers for the very interesting insight. I would like to come back to a couple of general points, the ones that you mentioned. And I would like to briefly touch on 3 points. First of all, say a very loud yes as an answer to your question. to what extent has COVID indeed made the case for more income security? Yes, absolutely. And for me, this is the main and maybe the only real silver lining of this crisis. The awareness that people need income. My second point would be to briefly touch on effectively these universal basic income schemes and other possibilities for income security. And three, my third point will be to focus on the fact that talking about income security also means that you cannot de-link it from a broader and comprehensive social protection system and what I would call social commons. So for this very first point, let me just mention in one sentence, and you all know it, but please let us not forget it anymore. If people have no income, it means there are limited possibilities. They either continue to work, and that means they put at risk their own health, the health of their families, and the health of the whole of society. Or they go home, do not work, have no income, and become poor or extremely poor. Or the third possibility, and this is what the report that was published yesterday by UNICEF and ILO mentioned, they send their children to the labor market, which means they fall out of the educational system, which means a huge waste of human capital. So people need income, and we have to take care of that. Now, my second point is that there are so many different ways to ensure this income security. We have not talked here today about the universal basic income because the Finnish system is a basic income system, not universal basic income. I used to call them the gurus of UBI. I mean, Philip van Parijs, Guy Standing, or Dutch activist Rutger Bregman. They are talking about universal and income for all, a monetary income for all. I think that is impossible, and it is the worst solution we can think of, because plainly it's unaffordable. And that is what the World Bank, the IMF, the ILO have said, and they are not ideologically against universal basic income. They just state and have calculated that it is just impossible to pay for it without raising taxes to an extent that it is really unacceptable. But there are many other ways. I just published, I will put it in the chat in a minute. I just published a paper with different mechanisms for income security. I mean, you have dividends as well. And you have, at the European level, we have two main important proposals. One for minimum incomes and the recent proposal for minimum wages. These are very good mechanisms for ensuring income security. And you have different kinds of cash grants. And you can think of a negative income tax. I mean, there are so many different mechanisms for ensuring income security. And what we should not forget, and what is very important, is that this whole discussion on UBI has been biased precisely because the meaning is changing all the time. I started my adult life as a linguist, so I'm very attached to correct meanings of words. And I know that the people in the movement for the universal basic income, some of them consciously are creating this confusion. Talking about basic incomes, which are necessary, which are absolutely necessary, and doing as if this were a universal basic income. And the discussion is impossible. If you do not know what exactly you're talking about, then you cannot have a serious dialogue. So let us be very, very clear on what we are talking about. And what the different speakers here have been saying is precisely the possibilities, the advantages, the problems with different basic income systems. But let us not talk about UBI because it is impossible. And let me just mention one point, what I think is very, very important. If we have a social protection system, and all, I will come to it in a minute, all our basic income systems take their place within a broader social protection system. Social protection is a system based on a structural horizontal solidarity. And that solidarity we need in our societies. Whereas universal basic income is a vertical solidarity. It's from state to a citizen, from state to another citizen, from state to yet another citizen. Whereas in a social protection system, we show solidarity with all. And that, I think, is the main difference and the main advantage of the systems that in many countries we still have, and we should indeed continue to promote. Now, the third point, you cannot look at these basic income systems delinked from social protection. What we have seen so clearly in this COVID crisis is that it is not enough to have a doctor, to have a hospital. You also need water, you need decent housing, you need income, surely, you need clean air. And all these things even go beyond social protection. And that is so very important. And that is why we have worked at a concept of social commons, not only for saying, look, you need a whole series of public services, for water, for electricity, for communication, etc., etc., etc. You need decent housing, but you also need water, etc., etc. And when we speak about commons, what we mean is that we should not expect the state to just decide on everything and provide everything. We need systems that are participatory, where citizens can indeed have their word, have their input. Because a social protection system that does not meet the real needs of people is not a good social protection system. So the commons is really just to focus on the need for involvement of citizens. And one last point, if you allow me, what I have a problem with is the exclusive focus on poverty. Of course, we have to fight poverty. Of course, we have to try to reduce poverty. But all these systems, if they are limited to this poverty, are end-of-the-pipe systems. And that means you first allow the system to create poverty and then try to solve it. Whereas with a good comprehensive social protection system, you can try to prevent poverty. And that is what we should aim at, I think, because it is perfectly possible. It is perfectly possible. So if we can think a bit more general, look at our societies, try to promote social cohesion, that we do not have to look at universal incomes, but at universal social protection system. Because what this crisis has shown is that we are interdependent. I cannot be healthy if you are not healthy. And you cannot be healthy if the whole society is not healthy. And this awareness is so very important. And I do hope you will never forget it, because it can help us to better organize our social systems and to better organize even our labor market and to better organize our societies. And I think this is really very important. And for the short term, please let us focus at the European level at the proposals that we have. Basic income, minimum income and minimum wages. And we have the organizations that work around it. We have the anti-poverty network. We have the researchers that work on minimum wages. Please let us continue that work and ensure that people have really a basic income. And that basic income has to be framed within a broader framework of social protection. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Francine, for this very interesting look actually at basic income, the meaning of universal basic income, but also really the connection about all the different elements and where we should focus on. Actually, you mentioned that what we should be working on is how to prevent poverty. This was actually the starting point also of our summer school. And we took a specific angle, but the idea was really to focus on social investment as a tool actually to prevent poverty. We now have 15 minutes, about 15 minutes for questions. A couple of them were answered by Minna directly. I think everyone can see them. They were quite specific to Finland. Minna, would you like to say just maybe a few words related to the questions to complete?
Sure, yeah, I already answered in a written form, but I can add something. Yes, we have a basic income in Finland, actually. We have a social security system that gives a certain amount of money. Everybody who's living in Finland, you don't have to be a citizen. You just need to have a address in Finland, and then you're entitled to social assistance in Finland. So yes, we kind of have a basic income in Finland, not universal basic income, but a basic income. So it can't be taken away. It's not related to whether you're active enough searching for work or anything. But it's the last resort social assistance, and it's not much, but it's decent for doing some groceries shopping. Then we have also a housing assistance, so you get money to cover your housing costs. So we have a very good social security. It's not the best in the world. It needs reforming, but it's quite good. Then we have this earnings-related benefits. It depends on what the benefit is that we're talking about. There are different kind of periods for entitlements and different kind of criteria. You can find more information about this in the web pages. I linked them to the answer. It's Social Security Institution of Finland or PES, so there's a lot of information also in English in the Finnish web pages.
Thanks very much. Maybe just a very quick follow-up question. You say that Finland will undertake quite a big set of reforms when it comes to social protection. Do you think that the experiment works somewhat as a trigger and there is some lessons to be learned, or you see it as an independent process?
It's a difficult question. I think we all have been involved in the discussions whether we can give money to people unconditionally. We know that when people are not pushed too much, they feel themselves better. That's, I think, why we saw the welfare effects of basic incomes. They were not being activated kind of to the boundaries of your strengths. So people are, when you lose your work, and it's a crisis in itself, and then you have to be really active all the time, and it's really a lot. And then this criteria has gotten stricter and stricter. You have to be more and more active in order to get small amounts of money. It's getting smaller and smaller all the time. So I think there's need for this kind of discussion. We need to discuss I think the last talk was really great about kind of this solidarity and preventing poverty instead of relieving it. So we really need a discussion about humanity, solidarity, and how much we can make the active labor market criteria stricter, and how much more can we actually use stick instead of carrots. because I think people are getting really tired of this. It's dividing people. We have those who use the SIP. There are always those who use the power and they like to use it. And then there are those who really are getting hit. And it's not very nice. It's unbearable at the moment. The whole system, not just in Finland, but I think in the welfare countries, which call themselves welfare countries, but which actually are very much dividing people at the moment.
Thanks very much. And then in the Q&A, there are a few questions for Marcello. So Ilse is asking one specific question. It actually came also to my mind, and basically a question is the following. I mean, in Italy, the citizenship income is basically conditional on searching for a job. So a question is, can we really call it a basic income if it's conditional on searching for a job?
No, actually, at all. It cannot be called the citizenship income as a basic income for two reasons. It is, I mean, it is conditional on job searching activities, and it is targeted exclusively to the poor. So it is, as I mentioned, it is called that way, perhaps also for political reason, but it is actually a minimum income scheme, regular minimum income scheme, and I'm sorry if I was not clear on that during the presentation. So it is a normal social assistance scheme with all the weaknesses and strengths that Sarah just mentioned, and that we all are very aware. So it is not, to respond very quickly to your question. If I may also pick on a very important point, and actually the conclusion by Sarah, and actually on something that Francine also mentioned. I mean, I always found quite strange this kind of the debate, as if there was a trade-off between minimum income and basic income, as if they were something that either you adopt one or the other one. Whereas they are, I mean, minimum income scheme, they are the least expensive social policy measures in Europe, actually, generally speaking, compared to big insurance-based benefit, or compared to universal health system, for example. And so, I mean, it's, whereas we know that basic income would have a huge financial implication. But more than that, I would say that they are totally compatible. Actually, we, as Sarah mentioned, we need to make as more inclusive as possible the welfare state, and especially social insurance benefit, and to make them more able to protect all type of workers, and I would say all citizens. We need to go to a welfare state, to pick up on something Francine mentioned, that actually guarantee common floor, guarantees some kind of rights to everyone, for example, in terms of social services, in terms of childcare, in terms of health benefit. At the same time, even with a universal welfare state, and also even with an insurance unemployment benefit that would resemble as much as possible to a basic income, I would think that we would still need some kind of very redistributive minimum income scheme, because poverty, I mean, we would like that the actually market mechanism, and that, I mean, that in general, that the labor market and function in a way, and the social protection system, that it reduces poverty as much as possible. I totally agree, and that should be the goal of macroeconomic policy and the welfare state in general. Still, there would be a need for a minimum income scheme that protects the core, the poor, and I think that, so, I mean, there is no trade-off there. We should envisage for a welfare state able to protect the citizens and most of the poor, and all the poor actually individuals, more than the other, I would say.
Can I maybe just a follow-up question on this?
Yeah.
I think where I think that there is a significant trade-off is the fact that you mentioned earlier the take-up rate often is low. So in a sense, you have a system where you don't manage to reach out to those who are in need. On the other side, and this in the Italian context was a big debate, the fact that you have a system which is generous or maybe easy to access make the case for people who may find other solutions to benefit from the system. So this is really the trade-off which we really need to overcome. And there the question is, well, if you make it easy access, are you going to overcome this trade-off, or are there other ways to overcome this trade-off? In one of the questions, someone is suggesting whether artificial intelligence or technology could help us actually to improve the effectiveness and the efficiency of redistributed policies. So I don't know who has, if someone has any thought both on the trade-off and on potentially new solutions to overcome the trade-off.
May I react very quickly before leaving?
Yes.
Well, obviously technology, there is a lot of room for improving administrative benefit, for improving the ability to assess income, let's say in real time. Technology has a role in it. There are some way, and this is clearly something that we should aim for, let's say, and also to make it. But I think that, especially with the reference to the Italian debate, the risk of false positive, people benefiting of citizenship income without having the right, have been extremely exaggerated. They are part of a debate which actually depict the poor very frequently as guilty of something, as a non-deserving. The Italian debate was also comparatively speaking quite awful in terms of how the beneficiaries of this benefit were depicted, and as if poverty was a fault, and if the main problem with this minimum income benefit is the problem of people not that should not have access to this benefit actually are benefiting from them. Actually, the comparative data outlined that this is not really the problem with the minimum income scheme. The problem is that there are a lot of poor people that are not accessing to this benefit, and also data on what is happening with Italian poverty, also with the introduction of the citizenship income, clearly outlined that this is the problem and not the opposite. Just final, when I was talking in Spain, I made some interviews looking at people that introduced regional minimum income scheme in Spain. And I was very surprised that the issue of fraud was not so much an issue in a very similar country for many reasons, such as Spain. And there they actually respond, well, okay, but in dubio pro paupero. If there are some few cases of people really that are a little bit over the line on that gets the benefit, that's not our problem. Our problem is that there are a lot of people who are poor and who are not protected. And I think that also in Italy, we need a little bit of this perspective, even though there is a lot of room for improvement, targeting.
Sarah, you wanted to add on this, I think, if I understood correctly.
Yes, so I had two thoughts. So the first one was reacting on your suggestions, Inja, of well, is there a trade-off? Do we encourage people to cater for themselves if there's a minimum income scheme? I think here we should wonder as a society, how far do we want to take this? Sometimes the solutions that people find is really like selling secondhand clothes, or really de-saving or making sure that stuff that they really need, that they sell it. So I do think that we should have a floor below which we say, well, we don't want you to make this trade-off because we don't think it's in line with human dignity. So, and especially at the benefit levels that currently exist, I think that is basically the other option that people would have, that what trade-off would be. Regarding the idea of real-time income monitoring and really heavily investing in artificial intelligence to make sure that we know real-time what all people are receiving and spending, I feel that's a very frightening idea. I really hope that we will not install a scheme that would do that for us. It is true that we might be far more able to identify the needy, but at what cost? And also there will be a huge practical problem before this would even become, you would have to erase the entire cash economy. And I don't think that's a short-term solution. What I do think what should be done are is to make stuff that can be done more automatically, and also to give people more the benefit of the doubt. So regarding these asset tests that may be very intrusive, now we check these stuff up front. A case manager comes in your house to see, well, is there a hidden painting somewhere in some countries? You could say, well, you can't have assets before this, but we will only check it when there are clear signs that you have high assets. So this is also an approach that some countries take, which makes sure that you can award benefits more swiftly, more in time, and that only when there's reason that you will really make these more intrusive checks. I think that's more of a workable solution that also makes sure that that there are simply stuff that we do not need to know. So that's I would make sure that remains the case.
Thanks very much. We are over time. I would just like to have 1 minute for actually several people made reference to the linkages with employment. This was also a bit our starting point. To what extent this kind of minimum income protection actually relate to employment, to what extent they can are associated with changes in overall employment or not. This is also linked to the what we discussed first for Finland, where employment was actually one of the general objectives, and also what Marcello presented for Italy, where the search for employment is one of the conditions in order to access the benefit. Anyone who would like to have a quick comment? Francine, please.
No, I think you should never de-link it from the labor market. I would not say it is a condition, but I think that all people are able, somewhere or another, all people are able to work. And you can link it to, in many countries, not in Europe, but in many countries exist public work programs, all kinds of jobs that are provided by public authorities for helping people. This can also be a form of income security. So please never de-link it from the labor market, and never say to people, you cannot work anymore, you will not work anymore. And that is also one of the problems with UBI, with Universal Basic Income, because many people defend it saying that I do not have to work anymore. I think that is unacceptable. What was my second point? I now forgot it. Never de-link it from the labor market, and please also look at the systems in a way that people are part of society. Do not put them in a separate category. And I think that technology indeed can do a huge part of the work, also for automatically attributing benefits. So to reduce the non-take-up. Has to be studied very, very carefully indeed. But I think there is a huge role for technology. Thank you.
Many thanks. Minna, you would like to say something, right? You are muted.
Yeah, just very shortly. I think it's, we always come back to the services. I think what's at least the Nordic welfare state based on are the free or affordable services that people can, on a low threshold, they can get. And I think we are very much focusing now on money. Money is kind of, I don't know if it's easy to talk about or why we're talking so much about income support and benefits when we ought to focus on services. And I'm very happy that in Finland we have now plans to put a lot more money to PES. So public employment services are getting more money, more resources in order to actually serve the people, not just give money, because people actually do want to work. They want to get services. That's what we saw in the Finnish experiment. They actually wanted to be part of the system. They wanted to get the employment services in order to enhance their possibilities to get work. So I think it's important to connect everything to work, because that's what people want. But in the end, the system has to be legitimate. It has to be, we have to feel that it's just. Otherwise, we have a severe consequences, rise of extremist kind of popular movements. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We are really over time, but I'm really glad we took 2 extra minutes for Francine and Minato to make this point and the connection with the labor markets and the fact, and this is, I have a strong belief in this, that people want to work, and working is a way to be part of society and to have our life more, to feel more fulfilled. So it's a way of realization of people. It's not just a way to earn the income. So I'm a strong believer of this, regardless of the kind of job that people do. So in this sense, that we should never forget to make the connection between the different schemes and the tools of the welfare system and what is going on the labor market. With this, I would like to thank you very much for this very interesting webinar, and I'm sure this is not the last one we will have on this topic. Many thanks again, and have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.